You're all very welcome along. This is the 11th year of the Dublin Festival of History. This is the largest program we've ever had. There are more than 200 events in the festival this year, and all kinds of history, some of which for the first time, like design history. But over the years, we've always tried to have a bit on sports history. But with the year that was in it, I suppose, and the Women's World Cup, and the way that really captivated the city, we were very, very conscious of programming around the history of women's football. Helena Byrne was someone that we wanted to have in the program last year, but I'm delighted that we got her this year. Helena has published in journals including Soccer and Society and Sport and History. And I can recall hearing her a few years ago on the History Show with Miles Dungan, talking about her research. The history of soccer, women's soccer in Ireland goes, I suppose, right back to pre-partition times and beyond. But I suppose the golden age of the game for women is what we're going to be hearing about today. The 1960s and the 1970s, very important times for women's soccer in Ireland. And today we're going to hear about how women's football started to develop at a rapid pace across the island of Ireland in the late 1960s. This talk will focus on the foundation of governing bodies for the sport in both the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland in the early 1960s and in the early 1970s, pardon me. A very interesting, I suppose, the contrast of fortunes, the men's and women's games in the North. But we are just so honoured to have Helena Byrne on the programme this year. There will be time at the end for questions. Please do ask them in the box, and we'll put as many of them as we can to Helena at the end. For now, it's over to you, Helena.
Okay, great. Thanks for having me. I'm delighted to share my research, especially this recent research. It's still ongoing, but I've uncovered quite a lot in the last few years, and that is in no part due to the collaborative nature of women's football history and those who were involved in the game in the past. It's a small community, but it's very collaborative and supportive, and we wouldn't be able. Nobody can do this research in isolation. So the success of it moving forward depends on collaboration between multiple stakeholders. So I'm just going to share my screen. I've got quite a lot of slides, as you can see. So just bear with me while this loads. Yeah, okay, so I've got my title slide there. And yeah, just move that and to hide these, so that should give you a better view then of the slides. So the discussion points, there's quite a lot to get through. So I'm going to race through very briefly an overview of women's football on the island of Ireland pre-1970. I'm not going to go into much detail about this period. If you're interested in finding out more about it, you can go to Playing Pass. It's a sports history website based in the UK. It's got a lot of articles related to Ireland during that period. And it's just simply to give, for those who aren't familiar with the history of women's football, an overview that women's football history in Ireland has a very long history, and it's not a new sport. I'll briefly go over UEFA and women's football. 1969 is when we start to see governing bodies across Britain and Ireland with the formation of the Women's Football Association, the WFA, in London. Then we've got governing body for Northern Ireland, governing body for Republic of Ireland, and I'll talk briefly about some of the first internationals in 1973. And really, for anybody who's been involved in the game, I'd really love to get some feedback on this, if there's something information that I've missed, because it's a living history that hasn't been documented before, and we're still, new resources are becoming available, and as we identify people, there's some people that were involved in governing bodies I'd love to chat to, but we haven't been able to track down just yet. So a few key dates. It's not exhaustive, but just to give you an overview, you see from 1895 to 1976 is quite a big period. So the first reference to women's football in Ireland happened in 1895. The 1910s to 1930s, a lot of this period, a lot of the women's football was happening in what is now known as Northern Ireland. And the Women's League in Northern Ireland was one of the most active leagues across Europe at that period. And then we have the 1921, the infamous IFA-FAI split, and the FA ban on women's football. Then we move quickly onto 1971, where we're looking at the FAI recognising women's football, and new domestic leagues launched for women in the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, and UEFA recognises women's football, and the formation of the Northern Irish Ladies Football Association and the Irish Ladies Football Association in 72. and 73, the formation of the Ladies Football Association, and 76, the formation of the Northern Irish Women's Football Association. And there's just a photograph there of an early Irish team that was based out of Belfast from 1932. So back to 1895, we have the British Ladies Football Club that were originated in Scotland. And you might have heard of this team before. Lady Florence Dixie was its patron, and the captain was Mary Hudson, who played under the pseudonym Nettie Honeyball. So they had their first exhibition match in Belfast, and then the year later they had a bigger tour that included a number of matches in other towns and cities, including Dublin. And you can read more about this on the Playing Pass website. Then we have, oops, I've lost some slides. I'm really sorry. I'm going to just stop sharing for a moment. Okay, and I'll fix this because maybe I might move to another place to share my slides. I don't know what happened just there. I'm going to go back to sharing there.
It wouldn't be a Zoom talk without some erratic slides, don't worry.
Yeah. And I'll hide this. There we go. So that should be. Oh, I made a mistake. Something happened to my slides. Okay, I'll have to go back. There's something order it happened the order of my slides. So the next big event that happened in Northern Ireland was Feminina Sport Club from France when they came to Britain and Ireland on a tour. So they were playing Dick Kerr Ladies, and along with Dick Kerr Ladies, they travelled to Belfast. And then they actually had a match proposed for Dublin, but was banned by the Free State Purity League. And I have tried to look into who are the Free State Purity League, but didn't really get any answers. I've spoken to some other historians, and they aren't sure who they were either. So it might have been just the way the newspaper reported on them, but they're one of those Catholic leagues that just was really against the all the dance halls and jazz music and all those things that were banned in the early period of the Free State. So another big step in the tour was was about Rutherglen Ladies Football Club, and they were formed in 1921 by J.H. Kelly in Glasgow. 1927 they had a tour of Ireland, and again in 28. And it's really through the 28 tour that Molly Seaton, you might have heard of her as the researcher, Steve Bolton has done a lot of research into her, and she has an entry now in the Dictionary of Irish Bibliography, biography. And so in 1927, this is the first time that we get record in the newspapers of an Republic of Ireland, what's now Republic of Ireland, team playing soccer. Doesn't mean that anybody didn't play soccer before that, but we don't have any records of it. And Michael Keelty's done a lot of research into this team, and so they were billed here in the Evening Herald as Dublin's first ladies soccer team, but in the Independent billed as Bob Fulham's 11. And they raised money through this match for the Holles Street Hospital. And Michael's done some research in tracking down who were these players, and he thinks that they were a hockey team and that they had connections. Some of them were married to League of Ireland footballers, and they just came together then for this challenge match, but that they weren't a full-time soccer team. And then I'm just going to skip back to that slide that just kind of randomly gone, a bit haywire. So women's football in England was huge during World War One. Most people know about what happened with the FA ban, but they don't really know what happened in the rest of Britain and Ireland. So on the 5th of December 1921, the FA called out affiliate clubs to refuse the use of their grounds for such matches as they would felt football was an unsuitable game for women. The FA called on other associations to also follow their lead on this. And so myself and other researchers Fiona Skillen, John Carrier and Gary James collaborated on an article that's open access. So you can just, if you want to take a picture of this QR code, it will take you directly to the article, or there's information on the slide here with the URL, how to find this article, or you could just Google it. It does generally come up, and that's open access. And it goes into the what was happening in football in Britain and Ireland before 1921, the time of the ban, and just after the ban as well. So it gives you a good overview of what was happening at that time, because a lot of times what happened in England is, taken for granted. Well, that happened everywhere else, but we all know that the impact of and development of women's football differs depending on regional differences. Even within England itself, there's a lot of regional differences. And then also the history in Ireland is completely different to what was happening in Britain. We had the partition, and then the impact of the church on the state as well, and what impact that had on women's sport. It was huge and still really under-researched. So let me skip back again. Yeah, here we go. So women's football in Northern Ireland pre-1970. Most of women's soccer in Ireland pre-1970 took place in Northern Ireland. And in 1960, there was a Manchester club stopped in Northern Ireland for 3 matches on its way home from cup competition in Venezuela. So this was the Corinthian ladies and Nomad ladies. They were both 2 teams, but organized by the same manager. And because they were, this is before the ban had been lifted, so they formed 2 teams so that they had always somebody to play against. And they traveled internationally because there wasn't many clubs in England at the time because of the FA ban. And so they stopped off, and they played 2 matches out of the 3 matches. They played against each other twice, and then they had 1 match in Larne, where they had a combined team. So you can see here on the right, the image, it's got the list of the players and what factory team. There were workplace teams where they came from as well. And then a little bit overview of what was happening in the Republic of Ireland. So on the left, these are more photographs of that match from 1927 against the Dublin team. And then there was a factory league in the late 50s, early 1960s in Dublin, but it's very hard to come across the newspaper evidence of this because it was reported quite sporadically. And I did try to have a look, and it's actually very difficult to pinpoint. But there was a lot of carnival football happening in 1960s. It was really popular, and it's hard to, they don't go into much detail, so it's hard to tell what is the rules. It's probably more like Gaelic football, or could be a mix of both soccer and Gaelic. It's not really clear because they don't really report the scoring. So you can't even tell by that way. And they just call it football, so it's kind of hard to tell which one it is. And in Limerick, there was a 1960 tournament for indoor football as well. And then you can see it was very popular in the 60s, but there was also, you can see from this announcement on the right, that some members of the church did not approve of this. So in Talentstown in County Louth, the Reverend Speaker said that there were rumours circulating of a team being started in the locality, and he asked girls to have nothing to do with it. Football in any shape or form was not becoming to girls. And this is, we have this printed in the paper, but it's not the first time we've heard about this. So we've anecdotal evidence of in the late 1960s when in Reestown is a small village outside RD. Some women there tried to form a Gaelic football team, and they were the local priest preached from the pulpit to say that there'd be no women's football in that area, and so they didn't form a team, so they had to go to RD to play football. And then a little bit more, I couldn't talk about women's football pre-1970 without mentioning the indoor football leagues that started in County Louth in 1966. Although there's evidence of previous indoor football happening, especially for boys and men, especially through boys clubs, and that 1960 tournament in Limerick that was open to women as well. From 1966, it became phenomenally popular and sustained quite a long period into the 70s. And it both started around the same time in Drogheda and Dundalk, but the Dundalk competition was organised as a All-Ireland tournament. And in 1967, what was called the Indoor Football Association reported that over 2,000 copies of the rules they'd shared with other organisations and venues. And this was a real springboard for the contemporary soccer and Gaelic football, because even though there was some stuff happening in 1960s, even in County Louth, a survey in Drogheda in 1965, a manpower survey conducted, interviewed a large number of people about their sporting and recreational activities, and sports was quite was not really recorded at all for the female participants in that survey. And when we look at the newspapers, the only sports available to women was mostly tennis, golf, and camogie. And then, especially for the first two, you had to be of a certain social bracket to be able to participate in those sports. And this image here, you can see it's actually some footage. It's a still from British Pate. They have some footage from 1966, and this is the earliest moving image footage we have of women playing any foot and ball game in Ireland so far. Nothing else has been uncovered yet. And in 1971, well, I will make one more point about the indoor football as well, because it wasn't just phenomenally popular for women. It was also because this is before, in 1966, before the GAA ban on foreign games was lifted. So lots of GAA players were also playing indoor football, and they did actually try to reach out to the GAA to bring about, saying that this is not a foreign sport. It's a true foot and ball game, and that they shouldn't be people penalized for playing indoor football, and try and bridge that gap. And so it kind of did help kind of spur on the movement of against that GAA ban that was lifted in 1971. And also a lot of the venues were ballrooms where show bands would play, and that kind of entertainment was starting to go into decline. So it was another way for those venues to make money. But also there was a big show band league as well, where they were playing against each other. So there's a lot of crossover cultural things happening in that period. And it shows then also that sport is a way that you can study society and the wider things happening in it. So in big movement in June 71, when UEFA mandated all members to recognise women's football and take control of it in its jurisdiction. So the members all had a vote, all but one, which was Scotland, voted against it, against recognising women's football. But and UEFA did this not because they actually wanted to develop the game of women's football, but they were worried about other entities outside of UEFA could make financial gain from women's football, because the Federation of Independent European Female Footballs, or FIF as I pronounce it, were not affiliated to UEFA and had already held a successful international competitions from 1969 to 1971. And also in Italy, women's football there was starting to become more commercial. Women were starting to make a career out of playing football in Italy, and none of that was controlled by the men's governing body affiliated to UEFA. But some UEFA members had already recognised women's football before June 1971, and so it was quite mixed across Europe. And the Women's Football Association, that was formed in November 1969. They held their first meeting in London, and 44 clubs attended this meeting, all from England, except for Dundalk Ladies. And the WFA put pressure on the FA to overturn its ban on women playing football on FA-affiliated grounds. And by the 19th of January 1970, the FA overturned its ban. So sometimes the UEFA mandate on recognising women's football gets conflated for when the FA overturned its ban. But it's because of the pressure put on them from the WFA that it was overturned a year earlier. But it didn't have the same media coverage as it did get when the ban was implemented. So a lot of it, sometimes you might see 1971, but it was definitely 1970. So Dundalk Ladies, so I was quite surprised when I was looking through the founding members of the WFA to find that Dundalk Ladies were there. And they were formed by Kevin and Nan Gaynor in 1968. And a lot of the players who joined that team came out of those indoor football leagues that were started in 1966 in Dundalk and Drogheda. And in 1969, they were founding members of the WFA. And from 1970 to 1974, both Kevin and Nan attended the WFA AGMs as a representative from the Republic of Ireland. On the 10th of May 1970, they managed to arrange a friendly match against Corinthian Nomads in North Wales. So when the WFA was formed, they organised cup competitions, but because of the logistics and costs involved in travelling, Dundalk didn't participate in any of these competitions, but did manage to organise this one-off friendly. And the Corinthian through their international tours before this, So the Nomads were a much stronger team, and it was quite a big score that the Dundalk ladies lost by. But it helped start building these international relations. And while there, Kevin met a Prestatyn ladies manager and convinced them to join the WFA, to become affiliated with them. And the following year, 1971, they arranged a home and away tour match against them. So in Northern Ireland, in 1972, Alex James started to attend the WFA AGMs to represent Northern Ireland. And at the December 1972 meeting, they received the terms of reference for the Northern Ireland Ladies Football Association, NLFA. So this became an affiliate member of the WFA. This meant that clubs in NI then paid an affiliation fee to NLFA, but they paid no fee to the WFA. But they were still represented, connected with the WFA as well. So in 1972, the NLFA was founded at Woodlands Hotel in Lisburn. They were recognised by the Irish Football Association, but this wasn't something that happened immediately. In 1973, there was an interview done with Carson Reid before their first international match against the Republic of Ireland in June 1973. And he did say that they were seeking recognition by the IFA. But by 1974, all the newspaper articles do state that they were recognised by the IFA. So it'd be great to reach out to some people who are involved in those negotiations about how they went. So I'm trying to track down Carson Reid from Newton Ards, but I haven't had any luck so far. And so if anybody's out there, please help me out there. And May 1972, the first season in the NLFA League football began, and there was about 8 teams in that. And in 72 and 73, the Mayfair Factory team from Portadown won both of these seasons. And in 1974, 3 teams started to get active support from the Irish League clubs, and Mayfair was one of them. And they were taken in by the local Portadown Irish League club and took on their name as well. And then in 1975, I think it was, the league expanded to more than 12 teams and 2 tiers. So it was starting to grow. So the Irish Ladies Football Association was formed in 1972 at a meeting in Portlaoise. And by November, the first round of the All-Ireland Senior Ladies Soccer Cup started. And then in February 1973, they inquired with the WFA about affiliate membership. But as they were from the Republic of Ireland and not a home nation of the UK, this inquiry was sent to the FA. So there, we can see from the WFA minutes that there's correspondence between the FA and the FAI about whether or not to allow affiliate membership. Even you can see that there's reference to it also, that letters were received in the FAI archive, but we don't have any access to what those letters were. So it's another kind of grey area of, so if anybody else has any access to these letters, we'd love to see them about what happened. But in the end, the answer was no, but we don't know. It was a period of a few months before the decision was made. And then on 4th of March 1973, the first season of the Ladies League of Ireland took place. And so we're celebrating 50 years since the first Women's National League for women's soccer in the Republic of Ireland. And that was won by Limerick Ladies. Limerick was one of the strong teams in the league and won a lot of, and they also won the LFAI Cup in 1975. May 1973, the ILFA formed the first women's international team. So if we look at the NLIFA and the ILFA relationship, it was a very good one, very harmonious and supportive. So at the WFA AGM on the 9th of June 1973, it's reported that all the representatives were assured, those present, that at least as far as women's football was concerned, Ireland was united. And it's really, you know, in 1972, especially in Northern Ireland, setting up a women's governing body, it should be acknowledged that that was quite a turbulent time in Northern Ireland when the Troubles. It was the bloodiest year, the Troubles, and then and relationships between the different governments across Britain and Ireland wasn't very good at the time. But in women's football, things were they had a very good relationship and were working collaboratively to develop women's football on the island. So the 5th of February 1973, I've had access to a letter from the NLIFA to ILFA about organising a friendly match. And so this is the one that happened on the 30th of June 1973. But in the letter, it declines the ILFA's request to field a joint team against England. Sorry. So this is also not the first time that we see that the ILFA was requesting a joint team to play against England, because in the WFA records, sorry, I just have to pause for a second. That they had tried to organise a joint team with Wales to play against England. And we could see the first match for Northern Ireland, for Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland, took place in Bluebell United's ground in Dublin on the 30th of June. And the second match that year was away, 27th of October, 1973. Okay. Oh. And it's interesting to note, in 1973, the Northern Irish men's national team were playing their home matches in England at this time due to security reasons, but the women's match took place in Northern Ireland in Lurgan. So, apologies. Fighting for recognition of the ILFA. So we don't know so much about the negotiations between the Northern Irish governing body and the IFA, because we just haven't been able to uncover those records. We have been able to see a little bit more about the negotiations that took place between the Irish Ladies Football Association and the FAI. So we can see in the records of the FAI that there was a meeting, notes that a letter from Pat Noon has been passed to the Leinster FA for their observations. Then another meeting a couple of months later shows that Pat Noon informed that he had no right to form the ILFA, as most clubs were not affiliated to any FAI structures. Also told they could not use the name Republic of Ireland for their first international match v Wales in May 1973. So so we know that they made contact, the ILFA made contact with the FAI in 72 when they were formed, but the FAI didn't do anything about it, and it's only when they formed their first international match, and also this period they'd made contact about inquired about affiliating to WFA, that the FAI were like, oh, actually, we don't have a handle on this. And it shows the organic nature of women's football in the time. A lot of the women's teams came out of workplace places, so they didn't have any male equivalent that would have been affiliated to any FAI structures or leagues. And then the 18th of May 1973, the ILFA responded to agreements made by Leinster FA at a meeting held 2nd of May, of which they only received notice that day. So it was very short notice. So only Pat Noon could attend on his own, because the other members of the committee were based outside Dublin, and he wasn't treated very well in that meeting. So it there was a lot of tensions between the two organizations at the time. So the ILFA responded on the 18th of May 1973 to say that they did not accept the decisions made at that meeting, and that they should have at least have equal representation in any new ladies football association which would be formed with our agreement as our association is legally registered with the government. So I haven't really been able to figure out what it means by legally registered. So I'll have to maybe explore with the Sports Council of Ireland, like, do they have records of dating back to when different governing bodies were registered with a government entity, what entity that was at the time. So the 29th of March 1973, at a meeting with Leinster FA and other women's leagues in Dublin, the ILFA agreed to hold a trial match at Tulka Park on the 27th of May, and it was confirmed on the 18th of May. But if we see the 27th of May, the trial match was played at All Hallows College. And this made then a big splash in the Sunday World in 1973 as well, that they had to play in a seminary, when they had agreed with the FAI that it would take place at Tulka Park. But when they contacted Home Farm a few days beforehand, it was said that they didn't know anything about this agreement, so they were stuck without a venue. And the image that was with this article is the team that played against Wales in 1973. The first international was away, and it lists the players. So the Ladies Football Association of Ireland was formed so I did mention this before about the emergency committee meeting, and then September, October 73 was the possible month that it was formed. We don't have an exact date because it does get mentioned in FAI records later, but the nature of those meetings are every 2 months or so, so you don't have an exact date. It's only when it's after it's been recognised. But there's a scrapbook from one of the players who played in a match in Paris on the 10th of October 1973, and in her scrapbook she has a pin of the LFAI and then the French national pins. So I reckon it's more September than October 73 when the LFAI was formed. And it was recognised by the FAI, and its first president was Leo Cleary. So if anybody has any more information about Leo Cleary, I'd love to get in touch, because he was a long-standing member of the Leinster's Football Association, and he was imposed as the president of a new women's governing body because so that the FAI could have more control over what was happening. So because he wasn't involved in any women's football beforehand. And then in 1974, we see the June WFA AGM, Kevin Gaynor requested an honorary WFA position as he was a founding member, and the committee agreed to recommend that Kevin Gaynor be made associate member in recognition of his friendship. And he did keep close contact with the WFA throughout his time. And there's correspondence in 1977 when he happens to be just passing through England when they're having their AGM, and he gives an update on women's football at the time, and requests to be able to join the meeting, which is accepted. So it must be noted, although we can see the tensions between the formation of a governing body for women's football in Ireland and the FAI, even though the FAI weren't so supportive and development on it, this is not unique to the FAI. This is probably a very common experience across women's governing body formations across Europe. It's a reflection of the time. So, at the time, women were only starting to get equal pay, but really, even though it was in legislation, it didn't always happen. So women were always, the status of women in society is the way that they're treated by football organisations is a reflection of how they're treated in wider society. So if we look at the first women's national teams, so in 1973, the Republic of Ireland played 4 matches, and Northern Ireland played 3 matches. And this is image on the right is from the from that match in Lurgan, October 73. And it's from a Lurgan newspaper. And with the caption that's under this image, you would think that the person kicking the ball is the Northern Irish team. But actually, it turns out that that's the Republic of Ireland played in a white shirt with black trim and black shorts. And the Northern Irish team is in green. So you can just see here behind, there is the Northern Ireland player. There isn't very many images at the moment that I've seen of the early Northern Irish teams from that period. So if anybody has any, I'd love to see more of them. So another overview of the Republic of Ireland's 4 matches in 1973. So the first match was Wales v Republic of Ireland, the second Republic of Ireland v Northern Ireland, and then 10th of October 1973, France v Republic of Ireland. And it should be noted, and then again Northern Ireland, it should be noted that these matches they didn't come out of isolation, they came out of relationships that were developed at club level in previous years. So the first match against Wales, that really came about because of the relationships forged by Kevin and Nan Gaynor through Dundalk Ladies in 1970 when they travelled there to play the Corinthian Nomads, and then again in 1971 when they had the home and away match against Prestatyn Ladies. And then with Northern Ireland, there was always close relationships between them. So I thought that the first Northern Ireland match had come about because of their relationship through the WFA in London. But actually, I've just recently been made aware that in 1971, when Dundalk Ladies travelled to Wales to play their match against Prestatyn Ladies, they had guest players like they did in the first match in 1970. They had 3 guest players from Dublin All Stars, and they also had in that 71 match 2 or 3 guest players from Portadown from the Mayfair Ladies Factory team. So that kind of shows that the international collaboration was always happening at club level before the governing bodies was formed, and then the international teams. And again, the same with France. That happened because of a relationship started in 1973 with Jay's team that travelled to France to play against Stade de Reims. And then Stade de Reims came to Ireland in August 1973. So we're just past the 50 years of that tour. And then they invited them to come to Parc des Princes to play that match in France. And I'm going to give a shout out. On the 18th of October, there'll be an exhibition opening at the County Museum Dundalk on the relationship between Stade de Reims and Ireland as well. So you can find out a little bit more about that at that exhibition. It'll be running from 18th of November to the end of January. And then if we look at Northern Ireland, you can see they played 3 matches, the first against the Republic of Ireland, and the second one then against England in 7th of September 1973. And so new governing bodies in Ireland and the WFA. So although the NILFA became an associate member of the WFA, and even though the ILFA, I've mentioned this already, did inquire about affiliating, the answer was no. So then but they still had close relationships. And we saw that Northern Ireland played their first match against England in 1973. And then it wasn't until 1978 that the Republic of Ireland played England, and that was in Exeter. I think part of the reason for it being a bit later than some of the other matches that they played was because we could see that the ILFA was inquiring with Northern Ireland and with Wales about having a joint team against England, because the standard in England was a lot higher than the rest of was quite strong. So maybe they didn't feel confident enough to take them on. But that was also a very interesting match and lots of things. So I'll go into another time. Okay, so the Northern Ireland Women's Football Association. So it was commonly believed first that the first governing body for women's football was formed in 1976. Even on the IFA website, you would see that that was the story, that it was formed in 1976 after a meeting at the General Post Office. And so even though it's NLFA on the title of official documents, NIWFA was used in newspaper articles, and they were recognized, and it states that they were recognized by the IFA. So it's still not clear what happened in 1976 to cause a relaunch on the erasure of the period from 1972 to 1975. So that's still a bit of a mystery for people who've been researching this area. So it really, we need people who were there at the time to be able to fill some of these gaps, because the evidence is not in the newspapers or in any official archive at the moment. So there's not many images from this period. As you can see, my presentation was mostly text, but this is a picture of the first home international team from the Republic of Ireland who played against Northern Ireland at Bluebell United. And there's only one player missing from this is Anne Griffith, the goalkeeper from Kilkenny. So this is Margaret O'Driscoll, the goalkeeper as well. So there was Anne Griffith started, and then Margaret Driscoll was substituted in the last 15 minutes of the match. So this photo might have been taken at the end of the game when players came off the field. And this is Frank Junior Keane from Limerick, one of the founding members of the governing body in Ireland, and he's still alive. Whereas this is Pat Noon, founding member, and he is sadly passed away a few years ago. And this is Mr. Brennan, who was the trainer for the national team as well, and the manager of the All Stars Dublin team. And then we don't have any images of the Northern Irish team, but this was the panel that was printed in the match programme at the time. So I'll just give you a moment to look at it. And you can see there's quite a strong representation from the Mayfair factory team. So there were so many players from the Mayfair factory team on this panel that the Belfast Telegraph had nicknamed them the Petticoat International team, because it was a clothing factory. And so what's needed? So at the moment in the Republic of Ireland, there is no official archive to consult for women's football history. And in Northern Ireland, there is a fantastic NIWFA archive held at Prony in Belfast, but it kind of starts about 1978 onwards. So we're missing a lot of this early period that I've discussed today. And so some ways that we can fill these gaps in our collections is through an oral history project or crowdsourcing and digital surrogates. So if you hold any any items related to this period of women's football, it'd be great to be able to share that with to deposit it either in an official archive or share a digital copy of it with one of these archives, so that more research can be done and it can be more widely documented. So the image you would have seen when you registered for this event, and this image here on the left, is from, thanks to Margaret Tracy, it's from an international match between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland in August 1976. And this is really what I've seen so far, the earliest images of a Northern Irish women's football team as well. So we could really do it more photographs to be able to document and make more visible who was involved, the details in organising the matches, because they were massive undertakings. They weren't well funded. A lot of players had to take time off work and pay for themselves to travel. And and the early matches, especially for the first decade at least, was developed through personal connections, through club level and relationships. There was no, when they formed an international team, they didn't have any support from the men's governing bodies, connections and contacting international opposition. They had to rely on their own networks to be able to develop their international matches. And so it's 50 years since the first international match. And I just want to say well done to everybody involved. It was a massive undertaking, and I'm delighted that they've been recognised now by both governing bodies, and that although the IFA haven't changed their website just yet, they have recognised that first early international on June 30th, 1973. So it's really great to see that more of this history is coming forward, and I'm going to open up to discussion now. So if you want, that's my contact details. I'd love to talk to anybody else who's got more information, because as I've said, this is ongoing research, and there's lots of gaps that need to be filled. So thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for that, Helena. A few points came in. Bridie said, "Can you confirm the 18th of November for that exhibition?"
Yeah, I could definitely confirm. I just can't confirm the time, but it's
Brilliant.
opening the 18th of November.
So put the date in the calendar.
Press. Yeah, that's hot off the press.
I saw a name on the attendees, and I was wondering if it was her, and it was Siobhan Doyle, great historian of the GAA and curator of a really beautiful exhibition at the moment in Collins Barracks on the material culture of the GAA. He said, "Thanks for a fascinating insight. From researching women's LGFA, there's a real lack of photographs, even of high-profile matches, as they simply weren't covered by the media. You mentioned a similar lack of coverage for women's soccer. Have you found many private or local archives that might be able to fill those gaps in images?"
It's mostly through personal connections. And then also you can't, because soccer is quite international, you can't research the history of women's football, let's say in the Republic of Ireland or even a local area, in isolation. So I've got massive insights now, especially in the formation of governing bodies, through looking at the WFA papers that are held at the British Library, and then the Prony records in Northern Ireland, and also that image of the newspaper of the ladies in seminary. I got that from a scrapbook from France. So yeah, so Ghislaine Soufroyer, she donated her scrapbook about Stade de Reims to their local archive there, and they were both very generous in sharing that information with me. And actually, she had a lot to do of newspaper clippings related to Republic of Ireland in that scrapbook, which I hadn't come across before, because that Sunday World article, I've later realised another Irish player has a copy of it, but it doesn't seem to be in the Irish newspaper archive, and I haven't or the British newspaper archive. So it was a real gem to come across.
Niamh down the road in Kunde Kiri said, "Will it be possible to download this webinar and hear it later?" Absolutely, yeah. All of the Zoom events in the festival history will go up onto YouTube, so you'll be able to enjoy them again. A few more have come in. Niamh, really interesting. Thanks for putting the presentation together. Is there anything we can do to gather more info? I'm already thinking, football fans my life that might have programs, information, etc. Yeah, it really does strike me from your talk that a lot of this is dependent on kind of the crowdsourcing of memory and the willingness of people to take part.
Definitely, and everybody I've spoken to has been so generous with their time, and there's no way I could piece this history together without people I've spoken to that were there. And it's they've been really great. But there's also, in match programs aren't always the most reliable source, although they can give great insights. Sometimes there's errors get repeated. So a lot of the national team programs sometimes have like their international record, but there's some matches missing from that, or there's matches with the wrong year. and they get repeated continuously. And then also because of the nature of women's football at the time, not everybody could make the match. So the first women's international match against Wales in the programme, there's 3 players from Kilkenny who couldn't travel. And so there, or was it just 2? It was 2 players from Kilkenny who couldn't travel. There's 3 on the programme in total, but 2 couldn't travel. But if you're just looking at that as your record, that's what you think the lineup is, but actually the reality is different. And some players that didn't get, it's only through photographs and talking to other players involved in that match that you actually get a real sense of what the panel was.
Bradley Fulbeck's point, 3 players missing from that Sunday World seminary picture. I suppose that's something, I found it extraordinary saying that often the press would just report on a match that had happened, but not list the score.
Yeah, and it happens a lot. It's very frustrating. Or they don't list a panel. And sometimes they might list a panel that's not accurate either because it might go off the programme. If there was a programme, not all matches had programmes or picture or photos. So it's really it's part of the collaboration that we're just pooling together resources. Somebody has one thing, and then if somebody else sees it, even if they don't have a copy of that, they're like, it triggers memories. So we just need to get more people talking together and sharing memories and memorabilia, and that can really, and that's why we need a lot more of the memory institutions to get involved in this collecting as well, so that it can be preserved for future generations, because we're right at the cusp of this still being within living memory, and especially when it comes to the politics of forming the governing body, that's a lot of those people have already passed away. There's only a small number still around.
Chris Lee asks, do you know much about the Benfica women's team from the South? I think they were in the 1960s.
Yeah, no, Benfica, brilliant team, still going strong. And Waterford is one of those hotbeds of women's soccer in Ireland from the contemporary period. And Waterford, along with Limerick and Dundalk, outside of Dublin. But there's women's football happening all over Ireland. There was even quite an active soccer league in Tipperary as well. So we really do need more localized studies. This is something Conor Curran, who's doing another talk later in the festival on women's football in Dublin, has advocated for, and I would support. We need people looking into their local areas and communities and stuff like that.
In the way that it happened with the Gaelic Athletic Association, that happened with other sports and other themes, the gathering of minds and the pooling of knowledge. Speaking of that, Niamh jumped in and said Benfica operated from Waterford, very much the child of Joey O'Callaghan and his sisters. Bridie similarly said, i.e. over 50 years, Benfica, one of the oldest teams in existence.
Yeah, and it's still going. And like a lot of the clubs that you see from the late 1960s, early 1970s, they come and go quite quickly. The same with leagues as well. And sometimes it's quite difficult to sustain. And so that's why it's important to document the history while it's still in living memory, because players move around. What clubs did they join? This kind of history could be lost very soon.
Sinead asked if you knew much about a team called Hearts Delight in the late 60s, early 70s. Her mother played with the team. There's a photo of the team that I can send you a copy of.
That'd be brilliant. I'd love to see that. I haven't come across them yet.
Brilliant. So we'll Sinead, how will we? You gave your email address, of course, for
I'll pop it into the chat as well, so people can pick it up and hopefully get in touch with me.
Brilliant. Frida says, many thanks on your amazing information chasing, connecting and highlighting and recording Irish, English, Welsh and French women's history. Many thanks. Similarly,
thanks,
an anonymous attendee, well done, and for all your ongoing work. As a journalist who's been covering this area, it's worth pointing out how proactive Helena has been in capturing this history, and that without it, those Irish internationals would probably not have got their official caps in the Aviva recently, or Lansdowne Road as I still call it. Well done.
Thanks, everyone. It's community effort. I can't do it without the support of the community.
Michael says, would you agree that there's been significant progress with women's football since the early 70s? Example, now women's international senior players play the same as men's senior team, greater live coverage on TV of the women's international team.
Yeah, definitely. And but there's still a lot of work to be done, and but it's not just the work of the governing bodies, it's also the work in wider society. The media has a huge part to play. So we saw with the 2020 campaign in the Republic of Ireland, that was brilliant in trying to bring to the fore women's sport as it was happening. But then when the pandemic hit, a lot of that reverted back to just the default reminiscing on men's sport. So we have to be careful that that doesn't happen again, that we keep pushing forward. But that's it's not just something, as I've said before, sport is a reflection of society. So we have to make sure that
Yes.
it's pushed forward, but also that we give more voices also to minority sports, because as tough as it is to tell the history of women's sport, when you come to minority sport for men and women,
Mm.
it's very difficult because it doesn't get covered. And then especially for sport for people, it's quite ableist, the media coverage of sport as well. So you've got gender issues, you got issues around ableism as well. So what about those other sports?
Yeah.
So the Special Olympics, the Paralympics and stuff as well. What about their sporting histories? How are they being documented and preserved?
Yeah, I often think about cricket in the Phoenix Park, which has had a great resurgence because of Indian and Pakistani
Mm.
migrants. A game that was synonymous with the old order, and all of that was kind of fading away. And now you walk up to the Phoenix Park and you'll spot a game of cricket happening. Neve says over the years there were at least three different leagues in Dublin: Leinster, Civil Service, and Dublin City. I'm going to ask one at the very end. In terms of the women's game today, in I don't know, historians like to say safely in the past, but I suppose the news of today is the history of tomorrow. Recently, Leo Varadkar was in Windsor Park and he was presented with that Linfield jersey, and there was a lot of coverage of that in the south. But it strikes me that the women's game in the north has been far ahead in terms of breaching sectarian divisions. There's a number of women on the Linfield team who also play Gaelic games. It seems like it's done very well in the north, the women's game, and remaining above and separate from the politics of division.
Yeah, so it seems that that's why we need a more kind of wider study. We need, in the Republic of Ireland, definitely need a study on the impact of the Catholic Church on women's sport, and also the anti-women legislation that was introduced around the time before we had the Constitution, we put women's place firmly in the home. We haven't seen the impact that had in development of women's sport. But in Northern Ireland, there has only been a few studies around the impact of troubles on sport, but they haven't done a gender
Mm,
study on that impact, because the experience of women and men is very different.
mm.
Because it's always taken for granted that what was happening in men's soccer was the same as in women's soccer. So there was a lot of tensions between the two governing bodies, vying for jurisdiction over the whole island. And then you have the sectarian issue as well around football, which is why the men's international team for Northern Ireland played in England, some of their home matches. And but you didn't have that in women's football. And you have also Derry City playing in the League of Ireland instead of the Irish League. But for women's soccer, Derry City play in the Irish League. So
Yeah.
we definitely need more studies into kind of the impact of that. And there's always been a very good relationship between the governing bodies in Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland around developing and growing women's game. So you can see some of that through the letters that are in the Prony archive of when they're encouraging each other, especially Northern Ireland, encouraging the LFAI to organise underage teams, because that doesn't really happen until the 90s. And so you can even see in some match programs when the Irish senior team are playing against, let's say, I think Sweden is one of the matches. I'm just going up, I could be wrong. I'm just going off memory. But there was beforehand, there was an underage Northern Ireland, Republic of Ireland match played before that as well. So they're always trying to develop the game and support each other, and working collaboratively. And a lot more needs to be done to help document that, and to kind of, to highlight just the great work everybody was doing around women's football.
Brilliant. So once more, you put it in the chat box, but I just want to give it again.
Mm.
Byrne.helenam@gmail.com is your contact. And yeah, the success, I suppose, of writing about this game is all down to the willingness of those who took part in it to share their stories. And that really was a great collaborative nature to that talk. And I'm really grateful to everyone who asked the question afterwards and shared their own memories of the game. So be sure to read Helena's work, as I mentioned at the beginning, in journals like Soccer and Society. I think it'll be a great book when you get it together, the history of women's soccer in Ireland. I very much look forward to reading it in the future. And I thank Helena for her contribution, and everyone who got involved. And I'll see you at the next Dublin Festival of History event. So thank you all very
Thank you.
much indeed.
Bye.